Welcome aboard Amity Boat Tours, the best and only scenic cruise on the island. What better way to talk about Jaws than a return trip to the shores of Amity, also known as Martha's Vineyard, the island off the coast of Massachusetts where Steven Spielberg cast and crew filmed the classic adventure in the summer and fall of 1974. Let's chum the waters and dive right in. Welcome to Classic Movie Club. I'm your skipper, Chad Knirk, the digital editor of Film Review. As Film Review celebrates 80 years, we're taking a look at another movie milestone, the 50th anniversary of Spielberg's 1975 classic, Jaws. Our first item of interest on your port side is Martha's Vineyard Museum. Let's begin our tour of Amity talking to Cathy Mayone, the managing director of Martha's Vineyard Museum, and Laurel Redington, the museum's director of programming and audience engagement. In addition to the summer-long exhibit Jaws at 50, A Deeper Dive, the museum is presenting Amity Homecoming Weekend, a 5-day event from June 19th to the 23rd, featuring exclusive talks and special guests sharing behind-the-scenes insights into the making of Jaws. When did each of you first encounter Jaws?
My parents, in those days, they just would want to toughen you up. So I did see the movie when I was about 7 years old. And what's funny is I was a swimmer. I literally owe all of my victories to Jaws because every time I even jumped in the pool, we had our own pool. I wouldn't go into my own pool without another person. I always pictured some person pressing a button below the surface. These little things in the pools would open up and the shark would just go right to my lane. So I was out of the pool before I was in the pool. That's how it affected me. It really was that terrifying. Even to this day, I remember one moment in my teens where I swam out at Musqueamicut Beach in Rhode Island and I was like, wow, I'm really far out here. And then the lifeguards were blowing their whistles and telling us to come in. And as we came in, we saw them more and they were doing this thing above their head.
Ooh.
And so I started swimming and
Shark.
got there and they were telling us that shark spotters had found a shark coming in our direction. And I think that was the last time I ever swam out that far because Jaws.
Yeah. How about you, Kathy?
I was saved from all of that, actually. Growing up in north central Pennsylvania, we didn't have sharks. We also didn't have a lot of movie theaters. So I never saw it when I was young. I think I was an adult once I started coming to Martha's Vineyard and realizing the movie was filmed here, that I saw it probably back in the early 1990s. Those of us that live on the island, you can watch it over and over again and look at the scenes and say, oh, I know where that is. Or you just pick up different things about the movie. I love watching it and I live in Edgartown. So every time I go into the town hall, I think of that scene because it still looks exactly like it does today. But fortunately, I was saved from the shark scare, and I'm also a swimmer now, and I just stay close to shore when I swim.
Yeah. Tourism, obviously, in Martha's Vineyard became huge after the movie and in the ensuing decades and all of the celebrations that have happened over the years, Jaws Fest. What's been a memorable experience for you at the museum, being on the island, related to Jaws or Jaws fandom, perhaps?
It's funny. My husband, he was a summer kid, and so he was here in 1974 when they were filming it. And so he does talk about being down at the docks and watching it. He wasn't an extra like many islanders did get called in to be extras, but he was here. He talks about how back then many people thought it wasn't going to amount to much. You heard all the stories like, oh, the shark's not working or they're having these problems with it. But it's really fun now to hear all of the islanders talk about the movie, and the museum has recorded a number of oral histories that we're going to have as part of our 50th anniversary exhibit. Some of those people are no longer with us. And so it's great we've been able to capture those. And I think what I'm really looking forward to with this 50th anniversary is being able to get so many of the islanders that were involved in the movie making and seeing it to tell their stories, because we this is the 50th anniversary and we only have a limited amount of time to capture all those stories.
For me, it's two things. One is I remember when in the 80s, when I first started coming, like mid to late 80s, the remnants of the original orca were still in the up in Menemsha Pond. I got to see that, but I never got to, like a lot of my peers, actually get on it. One of the things we're going to have at the museum this summer is an exact, meticulously recreated interior of the wheelhouse of the orca on display in our Doherty barn building right off of our courtyard, which is going to be so amazing for all the Jaws fanatics and anybody who is on Martha's Vineyard, who was in the movie, as Cathy was just talking about, to be able to be around people who may have experienced or seen that back then, to be able to be like, oh my God, the man, his name is Court. He's coming from Michigan, I think,
Yes.
to bring this here.
Wow.
And he spent years watching the movie, freezing scenes, looking at it. It's going to be an extraordinary moment to see that. And then the other thing is actually from the conservation end. I was around when the shark fests were happening, and they were just kind of like that scene in the movie when everybody was just, they were hanging sharks and they had this like barbarian mentality. And it was really unpopular because of the fact that after the movie came out, there was such remorse on the part of Peter Benchley, sad for making these sharks villains. And so after a couple of years, it just won out and Shark Fest never returned, which was a good thing, because we're going to have Wendy Benchley here a few times this summer to talk about the conservation stuff, as well as Greg Skomel, a shark expert who used to live on the vineyard, talk about the magnificence of this creature and the reason why we shouldn't necessarily fear them, but respect them, and the conservation side of things. So those are the two things that I feel like we as a museum are going to be highlighting, and the true depth and breadth of the story.
It is such an important animal in terms of the ecosystem. I'm glad that that's part of the event. You mentioned, Cathy, that the Islanders were such an important part of making the movie. I know the casting director, Sherry Rhodes, had talked about how they weren't able to find actors that were as authentic as the people right there on Martha's Vineyard. In addition to celebrating the film, these events and the exhibition are also a celebration of the community on Martha's Vineyard.
Yes, absolutely. We have our opening exhibition event, and a number of the Islanders who were involved in the production of the film will be joining us for that. They will also be joining us for events like our Amity Homecoming Weekend, and specifically our Reunion Day event that we have on Sunday, June 22nd. That's in partnership with the Vineyard Gazette. And the whole idea of Amity Homecoming Weekend is to really bring the community of Islanders together with the community of Jaws fans and have a celebration together of Jaws, and to bring these two communities that are so passionate about the movie, have different perspectives of the movie, bring them all together over what we're calling Amity Homecoming Weekend, and specifically this really special day, Reunion Day.
Another really special thing that's going to be happening at the museum this summer, it's not going to be happening until August, but it's part of our summer-long tribute to Jaws and its 50th, doing programming throughout the summer. John Campopiano and Kristen Kingsbury Henshaw, who is the daughter of Craig Kingsbury, who is the island character who is larger than life, that was actually the inspiration for Quint's character. He's no longer with us, but there's this film that's going to be released called The Farmer and the Shark. And it's really going to be another layer of this absolute amazing phenomenon of what Jaws is, not only to fanatics around the world, but to our local community.
This project seems like a massive undertaking. Cathy, to start with you, how did you approach tackling and spearheading all of the 50th anniversary plans across the museum and the homecoming weekend?
I was interviewing for this job a year ago, and I remember in the interview discussions, they told me that one of my first projects was going to be the Jaws 50th anniversary project. And so, one, I was really excited about it, but I did see that we were really going to need to come together as a museum across all of our different departments and really think through the whole branding and marketing and the experience for our visitors. And I also saw that it was going to be such a big undertaking that having business partners in this, collaboration partners, would be beneficial to us. So we did start meeting as a team. Well, I know, Laurel, you guys met before I even came on board, and Anna had been preparing for the exhibition for years, actually. But really, starting in September 1, I started to gather our museum team between our museum store, our visitor services, our exhibition team, our cafe team, Laurel's programming team, our marketing team. Bo Van Riper, our historian, has been involved. And so really coming together so we can think through the entire visitor experience. And then also I've been sitting on the JAWS 50th Planning Committee the Chamber of Commerce has had. And so as an island, we've really been trying to come together. There really is no single organizer for all of the JAWS 50th events, but as part of this planning committee with the Chamber of Commerce, we've really tried to map out our different events so that they don't conflict with each other, so that people that are coming for the weekend, they can map out their whole experience. And honestly, there's now so many events happening that it would be impossible, I think, anyway, I mean, you could, but you'd be really exhausted. I do encourage the visitors that are coming to come see our beautiful island too, because there's so many other things to see. And for our reunion day, we did enter a collaboration partnership with the Vineyard Gazette, which again, going back to, it is such a massive scale to undertake any of this with the staff we have as the museum. And so my partners at the Vineyard Gazette Media Group, Monica and Tressa, have been really great. So they are organizing all of the activities we're going to have on our front lawn, the meet and greets, there's a VIP tent, the food vendors, all of the vendors that are going to be selling merchandise. And so having them really be able to organize all that has been great. The bus is free on Martha's Vineyard all summer long, so it's a great way to get around. And so we're collaborating with them. If people want to take a JAWS tour, they'll be able to understand how to take the bus to take a JAWS tour. So we're really, as an island, trying to make sure we're going to do everything we can to have a great experience for our visitors.
And throughout Amity Homecoming Week, Laurel, you've been working with the lineup of speakers, which is such an enticing mix of people who worked on the film. And also you mentioned Wendy as well coming in to talk. What's that process been like for you developing that lineup?
Exciting, overwhelming, and organic. You know what I mean? And I know that word is overused, but it really has been kind of grassroots, just rolling itself out. It's just saying yes to the right moments. And Cathy has been very instrumental, obviously, in helping me juggle timing so that I am not conflicting with other people and making connections. It's really amazing what Cathy's been able to accomplish. I don't know how she does it, but
And you too. I mean,
well,
the lineup that you have, it's fantastic.
It's really, again, it's really exciting because Bo Van Riper, our research librarian, approached me really early on. As Cathy said, we've been talking about this for a very long time. I'm fairly new. The programming department is really new. Also, I started the September before Cathy, so I'm only there a year and a half, and we're just building our programming department. And this has been an exciting weekend to plan. On Thursday, we're going to kick it off with the Daily Jaws podcast, which is going to be exciting to bring that podcast to the island, to the museum. The next morning, Bo Van Riper is doing a 3-hour masterclass. He's a pop culture guy. He's written 11 books and he's got a memory and he really is he's a fanatic himself. So that's going to be an exciting 3-hour talk and really diving into the importance of the film and why it's been such a part of us. In the afternoon, we've added 3 programs, actually. So one of the new ones we just added is with Guy Masterson. He is the man who is really instrumental with Ian Shaw behind the Shark is Broken play. He's going to come and give a talk about that. And then later in July, they're going to have multiple performances at our Performing Arts Center here on the island. The next afternoon, we're going to have Christopher Shaw Myers. He wrote this incredible book that he's going to be talking about. And I'm reading it now, and it's just amazing. Wendy Benchley's going to be talking about shark conservation in the evening. And then on the day that Cathy was just talking about, the big day on Sunday, we'll be having talks on the inside while everything's happening on our front lawn. And we'll start off with Joe Alves and Dennis Prince, who actually just wrote a second book about Joe Alves' work in the industry and the DeLorean. He's just an icon in movies, but it started with Jaws. He's the one who chose Martha's Vineyard. After that, it's going to be Greg Nicotero, who's the man behind The Walking Dead, but he started his career with Jaws. Jaws just kicked off so many careers. And then Jeffrey Kramer, who was Deputy Hendricks. He is going to be there to have a wonderful talk. He's just a beautiful human being, always joyful, has so many stories. So each talk is just going to be talking about pretty much every aspect. And throughout the summer, we're going to be taking a lot of the people who were in the movie, the local people who were in the movie, who will be milling about, talking with people this Friday and during that weekend. We're going to have like around the campfire kind of story sessions too, that are going to bring these locals to share.
Next, we turn our bow to Bo Van Ripper, historian and research librarian of Martha's Vineyard Museum, to share his experiences in the water on the set of Jaws.
My father started as a summer kid in the 30s, and then my grandparents also first started coming in the 30s. They moved here permanently in 1940. I started as a summer kid when I was 3 months old, and here I am, third generation wash ashore. Wash ashore being the local slang for people who live here permanently but weren't born here.
That's great. Take me back to the summer of 1974 and an 11-year-old Bo on the set of Jaws.
It was late June, and as was the case, my parents left immediately after the last day of school. I mean, my mom was sitting in the parking lot with the station wagon packed. So we knew that Jaws was filming on the island, and I thought it would be fun to go over and watch what it looked like to film a movie. So my friend and I got driven over to State Beach, and we were sitting on the sand watching them do their thing. And the assistant director picks up a bullhorn and says, "Okay, we need 100 brave people to get in the water and look like you're having a great time." My friend and I looked at each other and went, "Sure, why not?" There we were standing knee deep in the water off State Beach. And the assistant director picked up the megaphone and said again, "Okay, so we're going to shoot a scene where you're all out there having a great time, and then suddenly you think there's a shark in the water and you panic and run for shore. So when the yellow helicopter flies over, panic and start swimming for shore." So we're all out there knee deep in the water, get down, try to pretend we're in water over our head, move out a little further. We can't move out too far because the cameras are on the beach and they need to be able to see us. And so the whole 100 brave people comment is now starting to make a lot more sense. So we splash around, look like we're having a good time in water over our head. The helicopter flies over, and everybody reflexively stands up and starts running for the shore. And the director yells, "Cut! No, you're supposed to be in water over your head, remember? Pretend you have to swim for shore." So we all gamely go back, get set up. The helicopter flies over again. So now we're in water somewhere between our knee and our waist, trying to make it look like we're swimming through water over our head, which as you get closer to the beach and the water gets shallower and shallower, it becomes harder and harder. By the end of it, we go from pantomiming doing the crawl to pantomiming dog paddling to pulling ourselves along the bottom, digging our fingers into the sand. I can't remember how many times we set back up and did that, 4 or 5 anyway. It felt like a dozen at the time, at which point we're all waterlogged and freezing cold. We've learned a really important lesson about filmmaking is that you never do anything just once, and that there's a whole lot of hurry up and wait, get out there and wait for them to get the helicopter where it needs to be, wait for them to get the cameras set up, wait for them to do whatever else they need to do, and then a brief burst of action, and then, okay, go back and wait and we'll do it again. It was really cool for 11-year-old me to be inside the making of a movie and to realize as you looked up and down the beach just how much went into putting even a short scene like that together. And of course, none of us knew at the time that Jaws was going to be the big deal that it was, not until the movie came out the following summer. And my parents and I were watching it, was like, whoa, this is so much more impressive on the screen than it looked when we were all shivering in the water off State Beach the previous June.
Right, because for all everyone knew on the island, this could have just been another B movie creature feature.
Exactly. I mean, and because everybody on the island, even those people were much, much more involved with the film than I was and saw much more of it being done, we're seeing it done out of sequence and without the advantage of the special effects, the music, the editing, and all that. And so, one of the most commonly reported reactions from people from the island who weren't filmmakers, weren't part of the crew, but were deeply involved in it was, holy cow, I had no idea it was going to come together this well, because it seemed like such chaos when it was being made. To have it all come together and gel as perfectly as it did seemed impossible. And yet,
You first encountered Jaws on the set, but then also when you saw the finished film, it sounds like you saw it fairly close to the release.
we were at the 7 o'clock show of the island premiere on the 21st of June in 75. Packed theater in Oak Bluffs. Most of the people dressed like they were going to a garden party in Edgartown because, well, that was the Vineyard in 1975. It was great fun watching it with a local audience because there was a lot of, oh my gosh, I know that guy who's, got one line in the background of the scene on the Edgartown docks or pops up briefly on the beach. There was a lot of hooting and hollering about the geographic liberties the film takes with the island. Brody leaves his house in Oak Bluffs. Seconds later, you cut to him driving by a lighthouse that's 18 miles away to the west. And then another cut, and he's pulling up to the scene of the first victim, which is another 20 miles back in the direction he came from. And somebody at the island premiere yelled out, "That was a quick trip." And, if you're local, you notice the fact that when the Orca steams into what's supposed to be Amity Harbor, they're coming into Edgartown, but when it steams out of Amity Harbor, it's leaving from Menemsha at the other end of the island. The beach that Chrissy runs across on the way to her ill-fated midnight swim is in one place, and the dunes where she and the rest of the crowd were sitting around the fire drinking and listening to music is in a totally different place. More photogenic for a beach party, but harder to run into the water smoothly. It's the same, I think, with any movie, that if somebody watches it who's deeply immersed in whatever the movie's about, I'm sure doctors go through this watching movies that are about doctors, and pilots go through this watching airplane movies. But yeah, in the case of Jaws, it's the people who actually lived here and do the island well.
The scene that you shot, the shark hoax scene,
Mm-hmm.
one of those boys that was doing the hoax in the film is now the local police chief, right?
He is now, in fact, the police chief in Oak Bluffs. And I mean, talk about coming full circle. And it's interesting because he and his brother, who's the other kid in the cardboard fin scene, were the sons at the time of an Edgartown police officer who went on to become the police chief in Edgartown. And they originally auditioned for the roles of Chief Brody's two kids in the movie, but
Oh, wow.
Sherry Rhodes, the casting director, picked somebody else, but offered them the parts of the kids with the cardboard fin. So there's this whole two little miscreants with the cardboard fin being tied to the police department that now runs two generations.
Yeah, I mean, Jaws seems to consistently attract these larger than life stories. And I know you'll be sharing a lot of those in your talk, Jaws Deep Dive, a fanatics look at a classic film.
Before I worked at the museum, I was a history professor for 21 years, but for fun, or what passes for fun in academia, I wrote a lot about pop culture, particularly the movies, in an academic vein. And this program I'm doing over Amity Homecoming Weekend in June is my chance to revisit my I'm somebody who thinks in way more depth about film than the average human being does, and to basically geek out over Jaws with a room full of people who also, in the case of this particular film, are really, really into the details of the movie.
Yeah.
So my goal is to try and using clips and stills from the movie and stories from the production, take them on a deeper dive, to use that phrase that keeps coming up in our Jaws programming, into why Jaws, after 50 years, is still this incredibly gripping, compelling movie that speaks to people, even after endless numbers of other nature run amok, monster eating people movies from the same era have been consigned to $1.99 DVDs in the bargain bin at Walmart. And also looking at some of the ways in which the extensive casting of locals, not just the Searle brothers as the kids with the cardboard fin, but Lee Fierro as Mrs. Kintner and the actual Edgartown medical examiner is the Amity medical examiner, and Donald Poole, the lifelong Menemsha fisherman, as the harbor master who's watching all the lunatics going out in their little boats hunting for the shark and
Yeah.
just sort of smiling benevolently,
Yeah.
gives the film a feeling of realism, and the fact and the way that having it shot on location, on the vineyard, on the actual waters around the vineyard, gives it a feeling of authenticity it wouldn't otherwise have. So hopefully this will draw an audience of people who get excited rather than rolling their eyes when you stop the film clip and say, okay, now look how they position Quint relative to Hooper and Brody here. And
Yeah. One vineyarder that his name doesn't appear in the credits but was very important, Lynn Murphy. What's the story behind the scenes there and in terms of his influence on the production?
Lynn Murphy was a local fisherman, mechanic, man of all work who hung around the waterfront and could do literally anything with a boat. He could fix anything. He could drive any boat any way you wanted to. If you wanted to, say, in the breakaway dock scene, figure out how to tow the floating dock around, have it make a 180 and come back as if the shark towing it was chasing the guy trying to get back to shore, but you needed to not have the wake from the boat towing it show up in the film. Lynn was the guy who could figure out what throttle settings and what amount of tow line and so on and so forth would create the effect you wanted. If you needed to fix the sled that the shark was being towed on so that it would float this deep when it was being towed, not too high, not too low, Lynn was the guy who could do that. And because he'd spent a lifetime in the waters around the vineyard, he also had an intimate, detailed knowledge of where the bottom was right for mounting the base for the mechanical shark, for where you could go in close to the shore and where the shoals extended way out, so you had to stay farther away, when the currents were going to turn and how strong they were, all that kind of stuff that the folks from Hollywood, through no fault of their own, didn't know how to do, didn't have the expertise to do. Lynn was also an influence on the production because he had a notoriously short temper and would blow up in colorful and detailed ways at anybody who annoyed him, which is somebody on the production, possibly his wife, said was just about everybody from Spielberg on down at one time or another. And Robert Shaw watched Lynn's mannerisms the way in his slow burn and the way he exploded at people very carefully and incorporated a lot of that into Quint, where Shaw's muttering colorful things under his breath about color television sets and cases of apricot brandy and swimming with bow-legged women, that's largely Craig Kingsbury, who played Ben Gardner and was hired by the production to teach Shaw to talk like, quote, a filthy wharf rat. When Shaw's growling at Hooper, don't mess up my shot, and grumping about him being a college boy with soft hands and I'll take you as ballast, that was Lynn Murphy as filtered through Robert Shaw. The seagoing curmudgeon and short-tempered old salt who doesn't suffer people who don't know, aren't as comfortable around boats as he is very well.
In thinking of the Vineyard and the production, it almost didn't happen on Martha's Vineyard.
Exactly. When Joe Alves, the production designer, was originally thinking of locations, he naturally talked to Peter Benchley, and Benchley suggested a number of places along the coast of Long Island Sound, which Alves dutifully went to look at. None of them really seemed right. So then he decided he'd go to Nantucket, and he got to Woods Hole, the jumping off point for both Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard ferries. He got on the ferry to Nantucket, and about a half an hour out of Woods Hole, the captain came on the loudspeaker and said, I'm sorry, folks, the weather's too bad. We're not going to go to Nantucket. We're turning around, going back to Woods Hole. So boat pulls in, Alves gets off the boat. There's another ferry tied up at the next pier, and he asks somebody who works there, well, where's that boat going? And the guy says, Martha's Vineyard. And Alves says, all right, I guess I'll go to Martha's Vineyard. The next morning, he starts driving around the vineyard and realizes when he gets to Edgartown, with its white clapboard houses and its picket fences and its scenic harbor, that this is exactly what he envisioned for Amity. And so the film that might, but for a winter storm, have been made on Nantucket, got made on Martha's Vineyard instead.
Reflecting back on that experience at 11, and now walking into this talk, this deep dive into the film, is that surreal? What is that moment like for you?
It's absolutely wild to think that that would be the part of my life 50 years ago that I would be revisiting now is just astounding. So when I was 11, I wanted to be, I don't know, depending on the month, an astronaut, an oceanographer, an exploration geologist. The idea that 50 years on, I would be a historian, I would be working at a museum, I would have a bunch of books and articles about movies published in my name, and I would be coming back to Jaws and looking at it through those lenses. 11-year-old me would have looked at you and said, you are out of your mind. At the end of the day, underneath it seems surreal, it's also deeply satisfying to have been a part, even a little tiny part, of something that 50 years on, thousands upon thousands of people are excited enough about to come from all over the country and all over the world to come to Martha's Vineyard and celebrate it. Even having just had a tiny little corner of that be part of my life 50 years ago is pretty amazing.
Our next port of call brings us in conversation with Anna Barber, the Curator of Exhibitions at Martha's Vineyard Museum, where a landmark exhibition, Jaws at 50, A Deeper Dive, is celebrating the film's 50th anniversary. Through rare photos, oral histories, original artwork, and authentic movie props, the museum's galleries recount how Martha's Vineyard played a starring role. When did you first encounter Jaws?
I knew about it long before I saw it. I was a summer kid on the island, and my mother and her siblings all remember the filming and remember scampering around out at Shark City and Oak Bluffs and taking pictures. And so I remember, just in the lore of family stories, hearing about this movie with this big shark. And then when I was, I think, appropriately old enough, after I had learned how to swim and wasn't scared of the ocean, I watched it. And it was really funny because it was something that had been built up so much in my mind as a kid of being this really nostalgic event for my family. We get together in the summer, they would often bring it up. Hey, remember that time we were climbing up on the shark and we got in trouble? And then watching the movie, it was a little anticlimactic because, I was growing up in the 80s and early 90s and, was watching all the special effects sort of change. And so at the time I was like, kind of cheesy, that shark. And it wasn't until I was an adult and just came back and revisited it again where I would really appreciate the brilliance of Spielberg and his ability to create suspense. It made me appreciate it more. And then now working on this exhibit, it's like a whole nother level, just knowing exactly what was going on behind the scenes and what the final product looked like given all of those circumstances.
Reflecting back on this voyage of putting the exhibit together, what's that like for you?
Oh, goodness. Well, we've been in the museum where we are now for about 6 years. And I've been working for this museum for 20 years. And all along, we've always been thinking about the big exhibits, the big stories we want to tell. And I was around during the Jaws Fest in 2005 on the island. And we did participate in that. I'd been thinking how great it would be to do an exhibit. We were in a really small museum that was basically a house in Edgartown. And it felt like not the right place to tell such a big story. So we opened our new museum in Vineyard Haven in 2019. And so we thought 2020 is the 45th anniversary. We are going to do a big Jaws exhibit. And so I got started working on that. And of course, we all know what happened in 2020. We were closed for 6 months and we decided that we would wait to the 50th. And so while we do a lot of other exhibits, so I wish that I could have dedicated the last 5 years to working on this, it still gave us some of the ideas or know if there were people on the island and who we should talk to and begin developing those relationships with folks who were either in Jaws or maybe had some special items from the movie. So it was COVID in the ways that it can offer the tiny blessings. It did offer us that ability to think a little bit more long term. But it's been really interesting, an interesting process. And even now at the exhibit open, we're getting people who are reaching out saying, oh, I've got this thing, or I was in this movie. Do you want my story? And so the challenges now are how do we take that enthusiasm and all of those new things and try to have it be a part of the magic as well.
Yeah, I want to read this quote from you that I love where you said, there's a special kind of magic in this exhibition where movie history meets island memory. I love that. What were your goals with this exhibit and what has that been like for you getting to now share it with the public?
Yeah, I think I've been telling folks this, we've been giving a lot of tours to people and it really feels like Jaws is an island story in a way that only we can tell the story because so many folks from this island took part in it behind the scenes in front of the camera and that the island itself was transformed with very little transformation, I might add, to become Amity. I think that there is something really wonderful where we're so often rooted in these historical stories and trying to get people to connect with the history of our island and the people of this island. And it's such a different take now. It's just so lighthearted and so fun, although not lighthearted for the folks who were working on the movie at the time, some of them anyway. Just to add another quote to this, there's a woman named Edie Blake who was a photographer and basically chronicles the filming every week in one of our local papers, the Vineyard Gazette, and took an incredible catalog of behind the scenes photographs. They're amazing. If you see a black and white photograph of the filming of Jaws, good chance that it probably was one of hers. She opened up a whole world of what it looked like behind the camera. But she had a great quote where she was talking about the premiere. So it premiered on the island on June 20th in 1975. And it sounded like nobody was really watching the movie. They were just looking for their friends and, saying, oh, that's what it looked like. But she likened watching Jaws to watching a home movie, which I thought was really something beautiful, where it isn't in essence, archival footage of the island in the 70s with island people in the 70s. It is this incredible movie that deserves the accolades and deserves to remain, in the top movies of our time. But when you look at it through a different lens here on the island, it is in some ways like a home movie. We get to see the island as it is no longer. And I think that's really special. And so for the exhibit, it really is a place for us to say, without the island and without its people, there would be no Jaws.
I mean, the bulk of that cast outside of the leads is made up of Islanders.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And we've lost, although Jeffrey Kramer, who is still very connected to the island, is coming back to be with us this summer. But so many of the others are no longer with us. And so it is, it's probably the most video footage I've ever seen of Craig Kingsbury, although his daughter has some wonderful footage that is being digitized. But it is a way to really learn. It's funny, at our museum, we've always had a special interest in stories. And so we've had a dedicated oral history curator for many years whose job it is to just go and collect stories of people on the island. And so having something like this movie, which is, if you listen to Quint, in some ways it's Craig Kingsbury and him talking in his voice and so many of the others. And the fact that so much of it really was kind of organic and there were so many ad-libbed lines that it just does read in some ways like an island story. And the fact that it does parallel a lot of times, when you think about island bureaucracy, and you think about the reality of living in a place where you're sharing your waters with sharks. I mean, so much of this sort of fictional plot lines are things that we at times grapple with. So it does feel closer to home in that way too.
Did any buried treasures from locals emerge as you were putting this exhibit together?
Yeah, for sure. We have, even though I'm saying it's the biggest exhibit we've ever done at the museum, our museum is in an old marine hospital that was built in 1895. And so we have this sort of collection of smaller rooms that make up our exhibit galleries. So we've had to be really thoughtful about what we can fit in the space. And so, as I said before, we're a museum that's always collected stories. So first and foremost, just the fun process of listening to folks, especially people maybe that you knew in one capacity, and then they come to find out that they were, they had a small speaking part, or they were helping as an assistant to an assistant, or they had some part behind the scenes that you had no idea. So just the stories are really wonderful. Photographs, for sure, people have been giving us. We just got an amazing collection of photographs that we're attributing to being taken by Roy Campbell, but were part of Roy Campbell's personal collection. And he ran the tugboat Whitefoot, which helped out with the production side of things. It was really integral to making sure that a lot of the lights and the mechanics were being able to be sort of safely transported around. He has this amazing collection of color photographs from the Whitefoot that offers a really interesting perspective of the orca, a really interesting perspective of the garage sale and the sharks and the filming sequences, which we hadn't seen before. His niece donated those to us and let us borrow a copy of Jaws that was given to Roy on his birthday, that was signed by all of the cast and crew, including Spielberg, a lot of whom had some really funny messages for him. And in Carl Gottlieb's book, he talks a little bit about Roy Campbell and how he was very serious but beloved member of the behind the scenes kind of island crew, because he really brought, like Lynn Murphy, like so many others, he brought this sense of how to work on the ocean, which so many of the others didn't have. And then we also, things like we have a barrel that was used on screen that was that is owned by a guy named Wayne Iacono, who was also, again, heavily involved. He helped run the city of Chappaquiddick, and, was up in the helicopter during filming, and I guess was a stand-in for Roy Scheider in a couple of scenes when they were he was heavily involved, but is a really sort of soft-spoken, lovely, quiet guy who is a fisherman out in Menemsha, and he needed a little bit of some conversations around safety and security, because I think he doesn't love the attention so much. So, it's really nice to be able to have a mix of things that were used in the movie, photographs, again, the stories, little things like a belt buckle that was made by a guy named Thaddeus McDowell, who lived on the island, who was making these shark belt buckles for some of the production crew. That one just sort of showed up. One day, a guy came in and offered it to us to use in the exhibit. So it's those little things that I think are really, the more that it can tie to some of those behind the scenes stories. But I do know that when you want to go to an exhibit about a movie, you want to see some of the things that were in the movie. So we've got a little bit of both, I think.
For guests coming and experiencing the exhibit, what are some of those rooms and some of that story of the exhibit as you're going through?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite spots is trying to work with the architecture of the building. So, like I said before, the exhibit is on the second floor, and it's a mix of office spaces and sort of small galleries that are along this long hallway. The hallway we're treating as an exhibit space, and it was a place for us to really kind of dive into the story of the Bruces, and how they were made. And so we have some of Joe Alves's concept sketches that he used from the novel to help pitch the idea to Universal about turning this into a movie. So we have them displayed, but we also took the technical drawings that Frank Wormser did of one of the sharks and blew them up to scale. So the hallway is really long, so we're able to make this shark be scale. So it's a 25-foot long, we took a small blueprint and we blew it up. So when people walk down the hallway, they can really get a sense of how big these sharks were. But we do have a room that we have a really big family audience, and recognizing that not all little ones will have seen Jaws or maybe should see Jaws yet. So we have one room that talks a little bit about Peter Benchley's journey after Jaws came out and seeing the effect that his book had on how people view sharks. Went on to really spend the rest of his life in support of shark conservation efforts along with his wife, Wendy. So one of our gallery spaces is really learning about shark biology and how cool sharks are, and getting to know some of our local sharks, not only just the great whites, but other shark species, and learning about the ways in which we're learning about them and tagging them and following their paths, learning about shark biology to help maybe ground everyone in the reality that we do share our oceans with them, and they are vulnerable and they are not the monsters that were portrayed in the movie. So that's one space. We have a gallery that, again, as I said before, really grounds the story in, the why Martha's Vineyard and how the people really made this film happen. So we profile some of the islanders behind the scenes and in front of the camera and those who captured it. We have a gallery that looks at the premiere, both here on the island and kind of the legacy beyond. But because our space is small, we really only sort of started at 1975. So we have a lot of memorabilia and merchandise, all that came out in 1975, that sort of marked the start of this entire sort of cottage industry of Jaws merchandise that still continues this day. And then our larger gallery, we have just some aspects of the inside the world of what it was like filming here. I think I alluded a little bit before about turning Martha's Vineyard into Amity and where they filmed on the island. Just about half the movie takes place on the Orca. So we tell the story of the Orca and the Orca 2. And we have what is believed to be, after extensive research by the owner, he believes it to be Mayor Vaughn's jacket that is on display. And also, a little bit on the inside of all the things that went wrong, everything that went wrong, whether it was the shark breaking down and why, and the complications of just filming on the water, to give a little bit of idea of really this case. They thought it was going to be one thing, and it turned out to be something very different. And then in our small homage to the jump scare, we have one very small room that's always been kind of an awkward space to tell any story, but we were able to borrow one of the original Ben Gardner heads from Greg Nicotero out in California, and let us borrow it. And we also have a very incredibly lifelike fan-made replica of Ben Gardner's head that's emerging from the hull of the Flicka that's in this small room. So when you turn a corner, you walk in and will be surprised by it. So, and then we talk a little bit about how that scene was reshot and in Verna Field's pool, and how they used, a gallon of milk and some black plastic tarp and made the magic that we see. And that's a credit to Spielberg's brilliant vision to not be happy with what ended up and knowing he could do more. And with really interesting mixture of things, he was able to create that magic. So we talk a little bit about that.
And you also have a couple interactive elements in there as well, right? I saw the wheel, what's gone wrong today.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, any good exhibit, we've learned about our visitors is that it's really important to be able to look and see and read and hear and watch and also, interact with an exhibit. So there's a couple places where we're asking our visitors to share their thoughts. So we put the question on them, it's 4th of July weekend. You've got this event that happened. It's up to you to decide. Do you close the beaches and you risk, a lot of money coming into the island that is needed, or do you knowingly open the beaches so you can vote on it and you can see how other people are voting? And also, yes, there's a big wheel that you can spin to find out what went wrong that day, and they're all things that did delay the filming, so really get a sense of how it wasn't just one thing. It was just one thing after another thing kept going wrong and making the delays happen. Yeah.
I love the room too, where you mentioned the merchandise, and obviously comprehensive merchandising goes back to Snow White, right? But Jaws was really one of the first modern films to really capitalize on the merchandising aspect, from t-shirts to Halloween costumes.
It's incredible. Yeah, we've been working with collector Jim Beller, who his focus is really on the kind of stuff that was made and sold after the movie came out. And it was really hard to choose. I wanted to focus on just the things from 1975 to show the range at the time. And there's just random things like ladies' knee socks with the shark on them, or, kids' nightgowns with the shark on them. This was just brought in a Jaws paddle ball that I haven't put in yet, also from 1975. I mean, you
Wow.
name it, it was everything. It was everything you could possibly imagine. And yeah, the Halloween costumes and squirt guns and puzzles and backpacks and you name it. But yeah, it's funny how that exploded and why Jaws. It's such iconic imagery. It's a easily recognizable, the colors, the shark face, of course, the logo, but it's wild to think that just about everything that could be made and sold with Jaws on it was.
Yeah, and without that iconic poster art, do we have all of that merchandise?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I in a really fun being someone who loves museums and always has and believes so strongly in the power of museums to help and create and ignite in so many ways. I was really excited to learn about the fact that Roger Castell, who's the artist behind the iconic Jaws face, we call him the Sixth Bruce, he was trying to figure out how to do this shark face, and he went to the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and he's walking around and he looks up and he sees, the sharks are sort of suspended from the ceiling. So you're looking at it, you look up, you're seeing that same angle of the shark, and he snapped a photo of it that we have in the exhibit as well, and it's an exact replica of what you see. And so these are the little moments where I get really excited, because I say, oh my gosh, it's the inspiration behind this iconic piece of art goes back to a museum and someone's experience in a museum.
Yeah, that's really
so you never know. Yeah, you never know where the inspiration will come from.
With all of the extensive research that went into this project, if someone were wanting to read a book about the making of Jaws, like you mentioned Gottlieb's Jaws log, what are some of the go-to sources for you?
Oh my gosh. Well, we were lucky enough to know Matt Taylor, who wrote Jaws Memories from Martha's Vineyard, which he did so much work and has been incredibly helpful in making connections for us with folks. But because his book is similarly sort of centered on the vineyard, and the experiences here. And it's just a beautiful book, and it's so, so well researched. It's incredible. But I have to say, Carl's book, as someone who admittedly has never found myself in a position where I wanted to read a book about the making of a film, but wanting to sort of read everything I could get my hands on when it came to Jaws, I found that book to be so entertaining and so interesting and so well written. I mean, of course, you would expect it to be that it was written by Carl. And combining that with Edith Blake's book that she wrote about her experiences filming, and Matt's book, and you're able to sort of corroborate, or you're able to fill in some details between the three. I mean, I've also read Greg Scommel has a couple of books. He's the Massachusetts state biologist who really has been at the forefront of shark science in recent years. He has a couple of great books that really just go into demystifying great white sharks, especially in this area. So sort of layering this real narrative on top of the experiences that Carl had, the experiences that Edie had in a very different way. And then, of course, Matt's extensive work. Those were our main, I would say those are our main sources beyond the people who were involved, just talking to them, which has been so helpful. But I can't say enough good things about Carl's book and about Matt's book. For anyone who hasn't, which I feel like if you're a Jaws fan, those two you probably already have on your bookshelf.
Yeah.
And there's a good reason for that, because they're fantastic resources.
There are so many ways to celebrate Jaws this summer, so be sure to look for celebratory screenings and events in your area, because there's nothing like seeing a classic movie on the big screen. Alamo Drafthouse Cinema is presenting a screening of Jaws in concert in partnership with Martha's Vineyard Chamber of Commerce, accompanied by a live score performed by the Cape Cod Symphony on the 21st of June. And since 2002, Jaws on the Water with Alamo Drafthouse has been immersing audiences who watch the movie while floating on inner tubes. There's even scuba divers that will tug on your toes to add to the thrill. And if you're lucky to have an Alamo Drafthouse nearby, their signature movie party brings Jaws to life. Don a shark fin hat, grab a yellow drink floaty, and take the plunge. That concludes our tour. But just when you thought it was safe, we're jumping back in shark-infested waters with more Jaws in July for Shark Fest. Laurent Bouzereau, the filmmaker behind just about every great behind-the-scenes documentary you can think of, is joining us in Classic Movie Club to discuss returning to his making-of roots with Jaws at 50, the definitive inside story, a brand new documentary from National Geographic. That's our show. We hope you enjoyed the journey. If you like what we do, please consider becoming a member of Classic Movie Club. Your support helps us produce a new episode each month and continue the legacy of film review. Don't forget to subscribe, like, review, and share the podcast with all your film friends. My thanks again to Martha's Vineyard Museum, Cathy Mayone, Laurel Redington, Bo Van Ripper, and Anna Barber. You can find more details about Martha's Vineyard Museum and their 50th anniversary plans in our show notes. We invite you back next month for another adventure, but until then, you're gonna need a bigger boat.